Hello, and welcome to the Terp Family Fundamentals webinar series. My name is Kate Belney, and I work in the Office of Parent and Family Affairs here at the University of Maryland. And for those who are new to this webinar series, our goal is to help you become informed consultants on the many campus resources available for your student. So if you folks remember myself and Brian presenting for our office during orientation, we like to say that during the normal course of events, there is no problem that can arise at the University of Maryland that a student can't solve using the many resources available to them here. So we understand that your students are going to you for help in their decision making, and especially when they're in the middle of tackling those problems. And so at the end of this webinar, you'll see a list of over 20 different webinar topics that we plan to host throughout the year to help you be prepared as possible for a variety of challenges that your Terp may have to face to really help you become that informed consultant. So please visit our website at terpfamily.umd.edu to register for those topics. We have about 35 minutes together today. Please feel free to send in questions throughout the presentation, and I will be giving those to the presenters at the end. And then we also will be recording this webinar, so if you need to step out early, don't worry, we will have a recording available on our website for you all within 1 to 2 business days. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sharon Kirkland-Gordon and Dr. Yi-Jun Lin from the Counseling Center to learn more about the unique stressors facing millennial Terps and how families and parents can coach them to meet life's challenges. So welcome, Sharon and Yi-Jun. We're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much. Welcome, Terp families. I'm Sharon Kirkland-Gordon, Director of the University Counseling Center, and with me is...
I'm Dr. Yi-Jun Lin. I'm the Acting Assistant Director of the Counseling Service.
And we are both psychologists with several years of experience working with college-age students. What we know about our students is that they are academically talented. They're bright, ambitious, competitive, socially conscious, and many of them are stressed. Today we will talk about this new generation of students referred to as iGens, their characteristics, the things that matter to them, and how they cope. So who are these iGens? This is a term coined by Jean Twenge, and it refers to individuals born between 1995 and 2012. Dr. Twenge is a professor at San Diego State University, and she studied the millennials and also other generations of our day. And what she found is that about 24% of the population are iGens. They are the most ethnically and racially diverse generation in American history, and they're the first generation to grow up in the digital world. That means that most of these students have cell phones and 24 access to the internet. So from her book, the book is titled iGen. The author concluded pretty clearly that while these iGeners are super connected, less rebellious, and more tolerant, they are also less happy. They're freaking out a little bit more easily. They're less secure and completely unprepared for adulthood. That means things like managing themselves, dealing with conflicts, and also trying to negotiate their relationships. So let's take a moment about stress and what we know about the ways in which our students manage stress, or the important trends that actually shape our iGeners. So what we found about our iGens, on the red side, you'll see the I's, which stands for the iGen, so everything starts with an I. And then on the right column, the gold column, that's basically connected to the definition of these things. So what we find from our iGens is that they're in no particular hurry. And they are, increasing their screen time. They are very much, there's some insecurity where there's a rise in mental health issues. They sort of function from an insulated place, but not so much intrinsic. So with that, they're, involved in, there's focus on safety versus civic involvement. The communication patterns are a little different. So in-person is not the only way to communicate. So there's a little bit of a decline that we're seeing, in fact, significant decline that we're seeing in in-person interactions. So again, they're the first generation to grow up 24/7 with access to the internet. There is a rejection of social rules that we're seeing. Some are obsessed with safety. There's little tolerance for inequality, injustice, or things that are not necessarily pleasing to them. And with this generation in particular, they worry about doing things the right way. They want to get good grades. They want to land the best jobs. And they're saddled with pressures that we've not necessarily seen before. So what do we know about the ways that our students manage stress? As we talk about stress, it's sort of important to get a sense of, what kinds of meaning do our students make around stress, and what are their ways of coping? To answer this question, I'm going to refer to some research that was done by Campus in 2017, where a meta-analysis was done of more than 200 coping and emotional regulation studies with about 80,000 young people. And he and his research team categorized the way that young people seem to cope with stress. And they learned that some of their approaches to handling stress were not very helpful or maladaptive, while some other students basically had very adaptive and helpful responses. Others had much more maladaptive and basically responses that got them into a bit of trouble. So when we notice their ways of coping with life, clear patterns emerge. One is that we have students who are your problem solvers. So what we'd like for you to do as I'm going through this is think about your own student and the kind of patterns that they show as it relates to the way that they deal with stress. So one is, again, the problem-solving students. This is a person who tries to resolve their problems through critical thinking. They look at the problem from a constructive point of view, and they may take in the advice and also the direction of others in trying to help to solve the problem. The second is called emotional suppression. So that you probably kind of figured out what that may be, where you repress the issue internally. You don't want to necessarily think about it, and you kind of keep the problems kind of under wraps, and then you go on with your life. The third is more like a psychological term. It's called cognitive reappraisal. And these are students who may examine the problem from different points of view. So they take the problem and they take it apart, and they examine their problems from a different point of view or different vantage points to figure out how they may deal with it or how they may resolve the problem. And then the fourth one is distraction. This is basically diverting the attention to something else. So it's not necessarily dealing with the problem, but finding any other thing that can get in the way of basically dealing with that problem. So they turn their attention to something else. And then the fifth one is avoidance. That's what I like to call, burying your head under the covers, where you ignore or you evade the issue. So for students who basically are in this category, they may find avoidance tendencies, like not really dealing with the problem. It's too overwhelming for them to think about, to deal with, or to resolve. So they may bury themselves, under the covers, maybe by not going to class or things of that nature. So as you kind of think about these are kind of shaping up to point in the direction of, those coping skills that are helpful and those that are less helpful. As we look at our problem solving, emotional suppression, and cognitive appraisal, those are ways of coping that seem to be more adaptive. When we look at distraction and avoidance, these are some of the coping strategies that may be considered maladaptive and may even lead to greater problems for our students. So, why does this happen? Why are some people more resilient than others? And Dr. Lynn will talk a little bit about their brains and resiliency.
Thank you, Sharon. So the author of the book that Sharon just talked about, iGen, describe iGeners as ducks that are calm and composed on the surface, but paddling madly underneath. Now, this is a very powerful image describing the challenges and presentation of this generation, and what partially we can do as adults around them to help them cope with this almost inevitable challenges that come with their generation, is to foster their sense of resilience. And I would like to talk a little bit more about the resilience from the brain development perspective. Before we begin, I would like us to start with a true or false question. Thank you, Kate. So the question reads, human brains do not fully develop until age 25. True or false? What might be your choice to this?
All right, just take a few more moments for the folks who haven't voted to let us know, true or false. Human brains do not fully develop until 25. Okay, I think that's the most amount of folks that we're going to get.
Okay.
And hopefully everybody can see the results, but it looks like the majority of people believe that true, human brains do not fully develop until 25, and a couple outliers who feel like false, they do not.
Thank you, Kate, because we were not able to see the result. Oh, yeah, we can see.
There you go.
Yeah, it's a majority, about 80% believe it's true. Wonderful. So the answer is true. However, it's partially true. It's partially true because it's based on the modern neuroscience study on the young brains that we are able to study in developed countries. We don't know if it's true in other parts of the countries. But the message, the discovery of this makes some parents believe that their young adult children are biologically programmed to make poor choices and then therefore need more protection prior to this age. But some scientists argue, though, that it is possible that today's teens have an underdeveloped brain, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, in charge of the executive functioning and problem-solving skills, some of the coping skills that Sharon just mentioned. So underdeveloped part of the prefrontal cortex due to a lack of or even a deprivation of opportunities and adulting responsibilities. And their brain could actually develop fully sooner and more resilient through exposure to life challenges and practices. So I think that's important to highlight, even though nowadays more and more people, including your student, know that this is true, that their brain don't fully develop until age 25, there's still a lot of space and potential for them to grow. And that's what we would like to focus on the next slide. So the next question is resilience nature, like genetically predispositioned, or it's nurtured? The answer is both. It is partially genetically determined, or some people call it hardwired, and can be further developed or soft-wired through life experiences and practice of a rewirement, which is a concept that Dr. John Arden talked about in his book titled Rewire Your Brain, that I will briefly talk about in the next slide. Now, so the takeaway message here is that the brain of your young adult children still have a lot of potential to grow, particularly when it comes to problem solving, emotional regulation, and resiliency development. They are still at the peak time of this development, and it's important to provide that environment, opportunities, and support as parents or a family to foster this developmental process. So if some of you are on board with this resilience development in the brain, then your next question might be, so how do I do that? How do I foster resiliency in their brain? To develop a brain resiliency, it requires moderate level of stress to promote neuroplasticity in the prefrontal cortex, which is known as the executive command center in our brain, and amygdala, which is known as the emotion response or regulation center in our brain. And the key word here is moderate level of stress. Not too low, not too high. To do so, this person needs to intentionally choose to step outside their comfort zone and make continued efforts to manage or tolerate the stress or discomfort until it feels relatively effortless. Dr. John Arden, the author of the book, Rewire Your Brain, we have a copy, a picture of the cover at the right corner. He called this process a brain rewirement process. Now, a helpful metaphor to understand this concept is the idea of exercise. When you're trying to strengthen or fine-tune certain part of your body or muscle, you know that you will not do so in a very relaxed or comfortable mode. You would first identify a set of a routine, like starting with a warm-up, gradually build up your heart rate, practice certain pulses or movements repeatedly and long enough to feel the burn, right? The burn is what we're looking for. And with time, you will not feel as much pain or discomfort to do the same set of a routine. And this is exactly how we would train our brain muscle for resilience or neuroplasticity. To help us remember this brain rewirement process, Dr. John Arden came up with the acronym FEED. It stands for focus, effort, effortless, and determination. So focus means that pay attention with intention to identify something you want to change. And he encouraged that we start with something that we don't feel like doing, but we know it's helpful or healthy for us. And you probably can come up with some examples already, things like that. It can be something as small as getting up 10 minutes early than your usual time, or making your bed every morning, or meditate for 15 minutes every day, to something as big as like public speaking. And effort means make continuous effort to manage or tolerate the stress or discomfort until it feels relatively effortless. And determination just means that determined to stay in practice for several cycles. So the determination is also another key point. Now, in summary, I think a key question to ask ourselves is that as family or parents, are we ready to put the young adults to work and to give them opportunity to experience and tolerate moderate level of stress, and to support and encourage them along the way, like a trainer, a coach, or a consultant? And I think this is another mindset shift that we all need to incorporate as parents, family, adults, and even as an education institute.
Okay. So you must be curious about, with all of this information, how to support your student. And we have a few tips for you to consider. Your students are now here at the university. They are in a very important developmental stage of their lives, where they are making decisions, developing autonomy, moving into adulthood. And so it's a very critical stage. And so it's also critical for you as families and parents to develop and foster, a different type of relationship with your student. So, how do you really support your student as they're dealing with academic stress, stress in relationships, just stress in general? The first one is what we've learned in working with our students is in the years that I've been doing this, and I've been at the counseling center actually for 30 years, what I've learned when I've been in the therapeutic space with students behind closed doors is that they really want to please their parents and families. Now you may feel that they don't, but in secret, behind closed doors, that's what I've learned. And some are devastated when they do not feel that they're measuring up to your and their expectations. Often they're leaving no room to learn from failure, mistakes, and they have a hard time recovering from disappointments. It has not been an experience of theirs in the past because we tend to recruit, and also at the university there are very, very high achieving students here. So they have often not experienced failure in the past, and they're not sure how to deal with it. One of the things that I've always said is that the University of Maryland is a place of a star among stars. So you have stars in the high school who are, many of those stars are your students. And they come here and they are with other stars. And the academic curriculum is meant to challenge them. And they become challenged. And sometimes they come face to face with not doing as well as they had anticipated. They come face to face with challenges that they've not had in the past. Because things, for the most part, have been easy for most of them. And so instead, when they hit those times when they're challenged or they have their first misstep or mistake or even failure, they may fall into a pattern of avoidance and maybe even distraction to soothe themselves. However, this pattern, as you know, leads to bigger problems. I like a book that I like to share with you. It's Dr. Carol Dweck in her book, Mindset. And what she says, she encourages parents and families to change their praise language, to stay away from praise that places a value judgment on intelligence or talent. Now you must say, so what do you do? I mean, you're really proud that your student got that A or A plus and they're high achieving. But simply put, praise that implies that you're proud of them for their intelligence or talent rather than the work or effort that they put in it to get there. Too many students are focused on the outcome or the grade, and they're not focused enough on the process, the skills, and the commitment that got them there. In Dweck's books, and it's DWECK, and I'll show you a cover of the book in just a moment. In her book, I'd like to share a quote and from her book. If parents want to give their children a gift, the best thing they can do is teach their children to love challenges, be intrigued by mistakes, enjoy effort, and keep on learning. That way, their children do not have to be slaves of praise. So in order to do that, we came up with a few tips here on the screen that you'll see. One is focus on effort, skills, and commitment rather than the outcome, meaning the grade. So for a student who, for example, gets an A, instead of saying, I knew you'd get that grade, I'm so proud of you for getting that A in the class. What you might think about doing is reshaping that. It must have taken so much effort to get that grade. Tell me a bit about how you got there. How do you think you got that A in the class? What did you do? What kinds of commitments in terms of times did you make? Tell me about your process. So in that way, you're engaging in a conversation about the process, the effort, the skills, rather than the grade itself. The second is to provide reassurance. When a student is going through stress, what they need is reassurance from you. And it's reassurance that things will be okay, that you know the appropriate resources to point them in the right direction if they need that. And then along with that is to listen, become a good consultant. That is your changing role with your student. As families and parents, we tend to be fixers. And so part of what we want them to do is to learn how to be their own fixer, that you kind of get out of the way a little bit, as painful as that can be, and you know that you can make that phone call and make it happen in just a minute, but they need to learn how to do that on their own. So you normalize mistakes, the missteps and experiences, the experiences with failure, and help them discover what can be done in the midst of it. Give them opportunities for the brain to develop neuroplasticity and for it to rewire itself. You want to also reframe the challenges as opportunities to grow. grow perspectives and brain resiliencies. You know, those challenges can be turned into opportunities. And that's the kind of lesson that you want to teach your students. The other is foster emotional regulation skills, like the taming of the amygdala, the emotion center in the brain, and engage them in adulting responsibilities. So give them a little bit. Try not to get in the way of fixing everything. Make it intentional. Let them manage their finances instead of sort of, we say, adulting rather than infantilizing. Provide examples of how you have overcome difficulty and solved problems when you were their age. The other thing we've learned is about
it's about screen time. I think in the book of iGen, the author talked a little bit more about the research that has been conducted. The longer that an individual has with their screen time, the more likely they feel depressed. And so in the modern society like today, it is inevitable that we all need to get somewhat connected with the internet. So what she is promoting is to just encourage a moderate level of usage of the screen time. And that is very important. And it's also very important to encourage them to identify offline activities, things that they can do without their phone, things that they can engage without their smartphone, like reading or socializing with friends. I think nowadays she's saying that partying is actually probably more helpful than ever, because it's really engaging your student in a social interaction. Since nowadays so many of them prefer just interact through their phone and not in person. So encourage a moderate use of screen time.
Yes. And sorry about that. I just had a coughing episode. I apologize for that. So the other is seek professional help if needed. And I think that you know, as consultants, about our resources, and that can be very, very helpful to your students. So anyway, here are the books that we are recommending and that we basically referred to during this webinar. The first one is iGen by Jean Twenge, talking about this new generation of students. It's based on research that she's done, years and years of research. Very, very interesting book. The second is Mindset, which is a really great book and even a nice gift to give to your student. It's easy to read. They're great examples. And it teaches them, it has a twist on basically how one can kind of see their lives in a different way, and redefines what success means. And then the third that Dr. Lin referred to was Rewire Your Brain. So it tells us that our brains are constantly developing, and your students are right in the midst of that, where there's an opportunity to change the way that one thinks and the way that one feels, and based on the experiences that they're having.
Yeah, and I want to highlight all three books are very easy to read. They are written for just general public and not professionals, and so very easy to read, and you can get some more concrete examples and ideas and exercise to engage in some of the things that we talked about.
Yes. Okay, so then I'd like to introduce you to our new app called WellTrack. And we're promoting this app to all of our students here at the university. This is an interactive self-help tool that promotes good mental health and is available to all of our students. Students can use it to address stress, anxiety, and depression before the issues become real problems for them. And it can be sort of like a resource that they can have 24/7. It includes a Zen room. It has relaxation exercises. It has all kinds of strategies and tools that students can use to increase their awareness about mental health and to address unhelpful thought patterns. Students can download this app to their smartphones using the University of Maryland email via Google Play for those who have Android phones, or the Apple iStore if they have an iPhone. So that concludes our webinar. We are just so pleased to have this opportunity to chat with you this afternoon. And now I'll turn it over to Kate.
Great. Thank you so much. So folks who are attending, we would love if you have any questions to send them on over. This is your opportunity to speak directly with staff on campus. So please take the next few minutes to send those questions to us, and I will make sure to ask them of our presenters. And I just want to say I really appreciated your examples for parents and families about what those conversations starters could be, or how to reframe giving positive feedback, and how to make conversation and questions about how students are making decisions. And for me in particular, what really stood out was for parents and families sharing how they navigated a similar challenge. I think too often our students think that we've just arrived, that we innately know how to make a budget, or how we just handle stress really well. It's something that we've always been able to do. And the fact is that we've all learned that over the course of our lifetime. And so really sharing that process with your Terp can be really transformative. And I would say if you're no, my Terp is not going to listen to me, there might be an opportunity to connect them if they have an older sibling or a cousin, an aunt or an uncle who could share that expertise with them. And so I think that's just a great way to approach working with your Terp as they're feeling stressed, is by normalizing your own experience, and that we're all in process of becoming better at managing stress. Okay, it doesn't look like anybody has any questions for right now. So I want to thank you, Sharon and Yijin, for taking time to chat with us this afternoon. As we bring this webinar to a close, I'd like to remind everybody that's attending that we have made a recording, and it will be available on our Terp Family YouTube page, which you can access through the Terp Family website. So if this is something you would want to rewatch with another family member, or perhaps with your student, you can check back in a day or two, and you'll be able to do that. You'll also receive an email this afternoon asking for your feedback. Please, please, please let us know how we did and how we can improve on future webinars. We truly welcome your thoughts. And as you see on the screen in front of you, we have a wide variety of topics coming up for the 2018-2019 year, and we hope that you will register for those and join us as you become more informed consultants on the resources on campus. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful day.